So great to be here. I hope you all are somewhat awake for this very exciting session on disclosure after the lunch. We will try to make it as lively as possible. So we have with us today 4 speakers who have very distinct perspectives when it comes to the issues of sustainability reporting and disclosure. So the idea is to give you sort of a holistic overview of how all this has been coming together in the last few years from the perspective of the practitioners, but also from the perspective of standard setters. So I would ask our speakers to come on stage. As you know, we have with us today, I will start in different order, Elizabeth Seeger, who is the board member of the International Sustainability Standards Board. And fun fact about Elizabeth, she was born in Rio. So we also have with us Vania Borges, Deputy Head of International Relationships at the Brazilian Committee for Sustainability Pronouncements. We also have David Utiashvili, Head of Financial Stability Department, National Bank of Georgia, co-chair of the SBFN Data and Disclosure Working Group. And last but not least is Joseph Akwasi Kuma, Head of the Project Management Office of Bank of Ghana. So the way we are going to run this session is that I have the opening question to each of our speakers, which would allow them to really speak about what they are focusing on in their day-to-day work. Then I have prepared my own second question, but I also would be very open to have the interactive discussion, because this topic is complex and it can be sort of cut in many different ways, and we would want to give you the biggest value for your time. So with this, David, you're going to be our first speaker. And what so Georgia has done some reforms in the financial and banking sector when it comes to the ESG disclosure. So if you could please share with us your key accomplishments, and also what changes have you seen coming on the heels of what you have done, both from the perspective of behavior/compliance with what you asked people to do, but also in terms of the incentive. How is it sort of trickling down?
Thanks for this question. So let me start with a very brief overview, from Georgian perspective. We had last 25 years, we have been very lucky as a central banker. I work at central bank quite some time, and we have been very lucky that we did not have any banking sector problems for us 25 years. No banking problems, and we had very high growth in banking sector, and banks have been always been quite profitable. So disclosure in Georgia was like a high-level thing just to show off how banks are doing well. So, disclosure standards have been there quite some time. We try to make public all the numbers which banks have. Just again, from purpose to just show off. So they had the same attitude when ESG topics came in. First in 2018, we asked banks to disclose information ESG related. But of course, banks start asking questions, what do we exactly need to do? So we follow up with the principles of disclosure and data and provide actually a template just to make it consistent and comparable. But again, template wasn't enough. Then banks were asking, the numbers we should put in each of the items. So then, of course, the taxonomy document was there. Also, we provided a risk management document recently, which also gives a guidance how banks need to fill more qualitative information there in this form. So at some point, we may say that we achieved a higher level of consistency and comparability across banks, and we asked them to publish it. So this information is also published on their website and on our website. But again, we saw that it's not enough. That not many people are actually downloading this report. So we always publicly ask media and analysts, to make interest on this. And also recently in 2023, we started to publish a status report on sustainable finance. And we actually they made a report, which normally we central banks don't do. We compare bank by bank, which bank is doing it that way. And that's actually when it's actually triggered the thing, we may say. Your question is how the sector reacted it. So that created, I think, the highest motivation, because after this, banks are always waiting on our report and to see which bank is ranking where. The also good thing is that for Georgia is that we have concentrated banking sector, but two of our largest banks are listed in London, and they have higher pressure from investors and from board members. And these investors are normally the same for both banks, international organizations. They compare one bank to another, and that creates a huge competitive pressures among them to be slightly better than other bank. So that helped a lot, and everybody is waiting for our report to see, which bank is doing better, and then even being marginally better is a big incentive for them. Management is getting surprised for this. So we may say that overall, after this disclosure and after central bank doing this work, like comparing banks, which is doing better, where who is championing, who is not, created an environment when the bank sector reacted and wanted to do things. So the disclosure helped a lot. If you just keep these numbers at your central bank and you as a supervisor try to pressure the banks, I don't know how strong your pressures could be. But when market pressures, our experience is that banks react on it, certainly. And we see growing in green loans, we see growing in risk management practices. But again, as always, not every bank is the same. We have 15 banks, I said the two, but we have some banks in the middle who do more or less good, but we have small banks who provide large part of our disclosure template as a blank. And we actually had, I'll be honest with you, we don't have our banks here. We had one bank which says that we did internal analysis and we found out that climate risk is not relevant for our bank. So some banks could think that way. It's a very small bank, of course, and maybe not material. But what I'm saying is that disclosure is not 100% guarantee that every bank will follow. That's another thing. So disclosure is a very good incentive, but not an incentive for 100% of the banks. So of course, additional instruments are needed. So that's a challenge, how to motivate very small banks, which normally are not dependent on global markets or markets in general, have some specific niche market and specific investors. So there are some additional motivations needed. That's our finding, to make sure that everybody complies with the things and you achieve the objectives. That's very briefly.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. So essentially, transparency is your weapon in this case. Yeah, and it helps, but of course, the capacity is always the issue, and standards are complex. So that actually creates a perfect bridge to Vanya. So Vanya is Brazilian, and Brazil is one of the largest adopters of the largest country size, economy size wise adopters of the ISSB standards. So this decision was made, I believe it was last September, right? More or less about last October, yeah, 11 months ago. And simultaneously, Brazil put the sustainability reporting and disclosure into their G20. So this topic has been extensively discussed over the last year, and we just had the last meeting on Monday, Tuesday. So what we have been looking at through this G20 work was the issues of the capacity building and also issues related to the SMEs. So from the perspective of the experience that you now have over the last year, what do you think are the key challenges related to the implementation of the sustainability reporting standards for different groups of entities, but in particular to the SMEs?
Thank you, IFC, for the invitation to be here and to share with you what's happening in Brazil. I'm an accountant, and I usually start my speech in saying that I love accountancy. And I think that information is so important for decision making. And what we realized along the years was that financial information, despite the importance, is not enough. We must see much more than the profitability, than the liabilities that a company has. And so we need to see what accountancy is not able to get. That is what we call environmental, social, and governance information. But we need this kind of information in a reliable way, so We do not just want to have another report to present to society. We want this report to bring information that is valid, that is trustful, in order to be used for not only for those who are outside, but also for those who are in charge of managing accounting. We do not want beautiful reports, sustainability reports, to be in the room of directors waiting for a meeting to start. We want very important and material and relevant information to be disclosed. And in order to do that, the best solution ever invented, in my opinion, was a concept called integrated reporting, because we use the financial statements as a fundamental pillar in order to base the sustainability information. And Brazil is very strong in integrated reporting since the concept was created back in 2013. And when IFRS Foundation embraced the mission of standardizing sustainability, it was the best thing that ever happened, in my opinion, because IFRS Foundation is already in charge of standardizing accounting information. If they assume the mission of doing the same for sustainability, the risk of inconsistency between financial and non-financial information is reduced. And at the same time, this connectivity between financial and non-financial will make room for another thing that is essential in reporting sustainability, which is the assurance, because I can trace the sustainability information until the financial statements. And that's extremely relevant. And the third pillar for that is the ethical side, because in sustainability, we have a lot of qualitative information, narrative information, and that cannot serve as an excuse to be less reliable information. So the ethical side must be there as well. And those are the reasons why Brazil, who wants to be a leader in sustainability, took the decision of adopting IFRS S1 and S2, and we are very grateful for ISSB in this sense. But we cannot have just big companies. We cannot have the concept of just having this kind of regulation to the big companies, because I understand that we solve the problems with sustainability with a thing that is called innovation. We do not want companies to be less profitable. We want them to find new way of doing their business that is less damage to the sustainability aspect. And small and medium companies are, by definition, the most innovative ones. So we want them as part of the process. We want them to be contributing to this process. So to have them in is essential for us. How to do that? It's something that we are still trying to find a way, but we have already realized that if they are not there, it will be impossible for us to reach our objective. It does not mean that we will put the burden of reporting on small and medium companies, but we must show them that if they are not prepared and willing to be more transparent, as they are part of Scope 3, and the listed companies should report the risk that they represented once it is relevant. If they are not prepared to do so, they will lose contracts in the future, because listed companies cannot have a small and medium company that is not prepared to provide them with reliable information about the risk and opportunities that they are generating. We hope to count here in Brazil with the accessory of SEBRAE, which is a very important institution that deals with small and medium companies in order to help us to develop this capacity among the small and medium companies, but showing them that they are not doing a favor for the reporting cycle, but they are having the opportunity of helping us to find solutions for the big sustainability problems in the country.
Thank you very much. So the takeaway here is that first you see the existing accounting framework as a good foundation for building more and better. And then this was a very actually interesting aspect of SMEs, their capacity to innovate, which doesn't often comes up. We always sort of say that SMEs are an essential part of the supply chain, so they need to be covered for the global corporations to be able to report on their performance. But SMEs by themselves are big innovators, so we want to equip them to be able to access markets. Thank you. So now to Osei, because Elizabeth will round us all up. So Ghana also has done some really interesting work in the financial sector, in the banking sector, when it comes to the ESG reporting. And as I was told by the organizers, you now have taken decision to move forward with the adoption of the S1 and S2, starting with the financial sector. So from the experience that you have accumulated by working on ESG, what do you see as key challenges for your financial sector to adapt and comply with S1 and S2?
So thank you very much. And I think I'll just give a brief overview of where we are. So we started the journey sometime in 2015, where we took a public-private partnership approach. So it was the Central Bank, the Bankers Association, and we also got the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, involved. And then in 2016, we joined the network, and we issued our principles in 2019, 7 principles. And together with that, we also attached the guidance notes on 5 key sectors whose operations are adversely affected by climate change and social sentiments. And these 5 sectors also form the bulk exposures of our banks. So we had to do that. Fast forward, the focus was on sustainability, like you said. And I think we've done quite a bit. We issued a corporate governance directive, and I must thank IFC. IFC is the one that helped us do that. So thank you, IFC. We continue to count on you. And now we have gotten to a stage where we think we need to also look at the issues of climate risk. And so on the S1 side, I think we haven't done badly. The reporting is not that bad. We are basically around 70% compliance. We've decided to take the approach where, even though it's mandatory to report, we don't punish for non-compliance, because the idea is to just as the carrot and stick approach we're using in Ghana. And slowly, I think we've ramped up. We're just under 70% as of the last reporting period. We're hoping to get to about 90% for the next reporting period, which is September. So we are hoping to get information or data, and we expect to hit like 90%. So on the S1 front, I think we are doing quite well. The challenge now, I think, is on S2. And I think for us, the key challenge is data, availability of data, reliable data, the infrastructure that has to be put in place to get the data, and also proxies that we can use for data that is not available. And so I was quite happy that I spoke to Rong, and IFC is working on some tools, a measurement tool, because I think for us, what we've been doing so far has been on qualitative, but we need to move towards quantitative so that we can measure progress. And I think in this regard, what we've done is that we've issued a climate directive to the banks. And what we expect from the climate directive is that we expect them that with that directive, they'll be able to identify climate risks, assess the risk, manage the risk, and also report on the risk to the regulator. We've given a timeline of about 2 years, and we hope that in that time space, we'll get the banks to comply And to start that off, we've also issued a climate survey, basically to get the banks to get a baseline of where they are, and also to give the central bank a sense of where the banks are, and that will feed into the implementation of the directive when we develop the reporting templates for that. So that's where we are. So I think for us, the key challenge here has been data, and also, let me put things in context. Ghana is currently in an IMF program to restore macroeconomic stability and also debt sustainability. The banks were quite exposed to some of these instruments, the Eurobonds, but I'm happy to say that our banks are resilient. The latest stress test that was conducted shows that the financial sector is robust and resilient. So I think on that front, we are doing quite well. So the idea, the issue here was that there were other competing priorities for the banks, but I think now they're on a sound footing. We can actually run with sustainability. Another key issue was institutional strengthening, and I'm happy that this helped us build capacity for regulators. Because for me, for us, that was very key. And in that light, the bank is using its convening power, and also with the assistance of, I think IFC is also playing a key role in this, where we have the financial sector sustainable roadmap, where the idea is to bring all regulators on board and to try and have, because there's interconnectivity in what we do across the financial sector space, so that there's a common framework. And I'm going to borrow a word somebody's used yesterday. We want to have a national passport for sustainability across the financial sector. So I think that's where we are. But I think for now, the focus is to try and move the needle when it comes to assessing the risk, the climate-related financial risk. That is where we are right now. And we've done I think this platform has exposed us to a lot. It was interesting to learn that some of the countries here took the opposite approach, where they dealt with climate risks first, and are now looking to do S1. But we've done the exact opposite. So I think this is a platform for us to exchange ideas when we leave here. And I think I'll leave it for now and can talk later.
Thank you very much. So essentially, you are easing your financial sector into the new set of requirements, and you are co-creating the way that the final arrangement will look like, and you certainly are not sort of going into the stick situation. You are focusing on the constructive process.
And we've recently adopted the ISSB standard, so I think that's good too. That's also a good step. Yes, in the right direction. Yes.
Very interesting. How many entities do you expect to report more or less on these standards?
No, all the financial institutions, all the banks. Okay. Yes, to start with, all the banks. Yes.
All the banks.
Yes.
That's
23 banks signed on the principles in 2019. So we expect the entire financial sector to comply with this. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So with this, Elizabeth, now over to you. And the question to you has sort of two sides. So we primarily focused on challenges, although some people already started indicating the opportunities. So if you could share from your perspective what you see as both some of the main challenges related to the EMDEs, but also what are the benefits that you already see coming up from the adoption of S1 and S2?
Yeah, sure. First of all, you introduced me as a standard setter, which I am today. But before I was a standard setter, I was a practitioner. And I was, as some of you heard me say yesterday, I wore two major hats. One as an investor who is evaluating companies' sustainability performance alongside their financial performance, and the other as a preparer, as I was overseeing our own public reporting and also reporting to our private fund investors. And it was because of my frustration wearing both of those hats and my concern that we were doing sort of value destroying activities, not value creating activities, but actually value destroying activities by checking boxes and sometimes being asked the same question in 3 different ways, that I decided to leave that role and work on creating a solution to that challenge. So now I am a standard setter who brings with me this perspective of needing to stop the chaos that was becoming the sustainability disclosure landscape. And so for me, as a former practitioner, potentially a future practitioner, but certainly as a standard setter, the real benefit of the ISSB standards is that we are coming up with a business relevant, streamlined, globally relevant set of standards that brings together both the sustainability related issues and the financial related issues in a way that enables the global capital markets to have a real understanding of how companies are performing and are going to perform in the future. And so that's the vision, right? And I think, given who you all are, and everybody's in a different stage of their journey, and everybody, some people are starting with climate, some people are starting otherwise. I do want to highlight a couple of things about the ISSB standards that I think are particularly relevant for this group to understand. The first is, and sorry for those of you who heard me say this already, we are not starting from zero. The ISSB standards are built on existing prevailing practices for sustainability disclosures worldwide. The Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board's industry-specific standards. You mentioned the Integrated Reporting Framework. All of these acronyms are now part of the ISSB standards. So we're not talking about a completely new language. We're talking about taking in a language that companies have been using in various ways and to various extents and not always great quality, but bringing them together with the addition of well-known accounting concepts to create a new language that everybody can use together, again, for this global passport. And it doesn't end there. It's not just what we built on so far. There's ongoing efforts to improve convergence and interoperability, which I think are different things. On convergence, for example, I think there were some CDP colleagues right there in the room. An example of convergence is the fact that the CDP has now aligned their climate-related questionnaire with the ISSB's S2. What does that mean? That means that you can use the same data for both needs. Again, an example of convergence. Another example of convergence is the work that the ISSB is doing with the greenhouse gas protocol, which is the primary way that companies are measuring greenhouse gas emissions to date, and make sure that we continue to be aligned in the way that we're thinking about carbon measurement and disclosures. Under interoperability, 2 examples there. ISSB is working with the Global Reporting Initiative to ensure that companies that want to communicate to investors and other stakeholders have a streamlined way to do both by using both sets of standards, and that we're not asking the same questions different ways. And also with Europe. And I know a number of people and companies all over the world are concerned about having to report information in multiple different ways to comply with the European regulations and other countries. And there we've developed the interoperability guidance to support companies navigating between one or the other. So I just want to say, stay tuned. This is a really important part of what the ISSB was created to do, was bring that convergence, and where convergence isn't appropriate or going to happen, bring the interoperability. The second thing I want to highlight is why I'm here today, which is that we have a deep commitment to implementation and adoption of the standards and supporting not only companies in doing it, but also jurisdictions as well along the way. One thing I encourage you all to take a look at is our regulatory implementation program, also known as RIP. If you Google Regulatory Implementation Program and IFRS, you'll find an outline that describes very clearly all of the activities that we have underway now to support regulators in understanding the policy rationale and putting in place these requirements in their own jurisdictions. I also encourage you to take a look at our Knowledge Hub. We are constantly creating educational materials, either ourselves or in partnership with others, to support people around the world, which includes the upcoming training session on September 17th with SBFN, where we will be speaking specifically about the application of the standards to banks. That's just one example. And then, I've mentioned partnerships, but certainly the partnership we have with IFC on SBFN is a very important example of the partnerships that we have going on around the world. So all of these things to say that this is a really important moment for this sustainability disclosure community. And my two pieces of advice for everybody is, one, get started. There's a lot of content out there. We're not starting from scratch. Get started. There are lots of resources for everybody. And two, get involved. There is always the risk of additional fragmentation coming our way. There are always public consultations. Europe is still working, for example, on the industry-specific disclosures. There's an opportunity to get involved there. So those are my two things, sort of pieces of advice. And I just want to thank the countries represented on this panel for the work that you all have done so far and all of the feedback that you all have given us along the way as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have 20 minutes left. And as I said, I actually have my own follow-up questions to every participant, but I would like to see if we would have any questions from the floor. Yes. We have a question.
Thanks. I'm Sarah McPhail from the South African Prudential Authority. I guess it's a general question around if there's disclosures only by the financial sector and not by non-financial corporates, then the disclosure effectively becomes a cost of financing. Rather than having kind of ISSB disclosures by non-financial corporates. I know, like Ghana said, they're just doing it for banks. So, maybe just some commentary on that. Is it advisable to kind of push disclosures through banking requirements versus non-financial corporate disclosures more broadly? Because as financial regulators, we can only set guidance for the institutions that we regulate.
Yeah, well, it really is the choice of jurisdiction how to approach this. It depends on your specific circumstances, but probably I think Elizabeth, you would be the best sort of.
I was just thinking I was not the best to answer that question. I think it would be maybe the examples from others, but to your point, just to reflect on that, it is jurisdiction specific, and we're seeing that because everybody sort of has their own circumstances that they're dealing with. And that's one reason why I do recommend people take a look at that regulatory implementation program, which acknowledges the fact that there are differences in terms of what the scopes and responsibilities of different regulators. But that's where my expertise ends, and I'll pass it up.
So I think I can say a few. So for Ghana, so the ICA, that's the Institute of Chartered Accountants, they are the body mandated for approving and adopting standards for financial reporting. So this is what they've done. They've come up with a 3-year timeline, and it's tiered for compliance with S1 and S2. And I think the idea here is that you start with the big corporates and also the likes of the banks compliance. And then there's also the third tier, which targets the MSMEs. But the idea here is that because of the sensitive nature of, and because they are very cost sensitive, you give them enough time to comply. So that's what we're trying to do in Ghana right now. The body expects everybody to be compliant by the end of 2027. That's quite aspirational, but I think for them, the idea is that let's at least start something, and hopefully we can make more progress. But the onus as we speak is on the big corporates and also the banks. The banks to force their, not to force, but to work with their big clients to develop these standards and start reporting on them. But ultimately, by the end of 2027, the reporting, the ICA expects all companies or registered businesses to comply with both S1 and S2, but has given MSMEs more time and flexibility to achieve this particular target. Yes.
Yeah, I can just. Yeah, we have the same practices. We have a regulator for audited statement, and we work together with them. We have just little ambitious plans, so we started with beginning from 2027. So, but you know, we are a finance sector regulator. We know how to speed up the process in banking sector, and we do that. But for non-banks, for corporates, it's more broader agenda, so it takes a little more time. But we have the same plans.
Yeah, we have a question. Yeah. Oh, we have two questions.
I'll go, and then I'll give my mic to Nomi after that. Just to build on what Sarah was asking, I'm interested to know from the ISSB perspective, if you have an ideal cascade strategy for countries, like where do you think it should start so that you've got a good sequence? I really liked what the EU did with their taxonomy reporting phase in with the companies, and then the data, then it was first year one was the companies, and then year two it was the financial sector. So they had data to actually use for the financial sector reporting. So I think in choosing which regulators take the lead is quite a strategic thing.
Yeah, I will say, just as a caveat, I'm on the standards board of the ISSB and do not lead purposefully the work directly with regulators, because that is about the implementation and adoption work, and we do keep a separate role there. I will encourage you to take a look at something called our jurisdictional adoption guide. So, you know, the punchline of all this work is that in order to achieve our goal, we need jurisdictions to adopt the ISSB standards as written, or as close to as written as possible, right? To ensure that we aren't seeing fragmentation globally in how different countries, jurisdictions are applying them, and how different companies are applying them, different sizes, et cetera. That said, we do recognize there are differences in the circumstances of particular countries. And so the jurisdictional adoption guide, it does a couple things that are important, I think. One, and then I'd love any reflections and disagreements with this, but one, it outlines specifically all of the proportionality mechanisms and relief periods that are already built into the standards, so that as you all are going through your processes at the jurisdictional level, you can understand what's already accounted for there. And then second, provide some guidance on what might be additional reliefs that you might consider should you need to do it, for example, from a timing perspective. The goal of that is to ensure that while there's some flexibility, understanding that there needs to be flexibility in the adoption of the standards, there is, again, no fragmentation in the way that or significant fragmentation in the way that they are actually applied. But would love for you to respond to that as well.
Well, I cannot comply about the jurisdiction guide because I was in charge of translating it into Portuguese, and we'll be releasing quite soon. I think it is very important that we do not start each jurisdiction giving a particular or a tropicalization, what we call in Brazil, to the standard, because if you do so, we will lose the global comparability that is so important for all of us. What he did in Brazil was the announcement of the Securities Commission was enacted in October 2023, and it demands all listed companies in Brazil and also investment funds to publish IFRS S1 and S2 beginning 2026 to report in 27 with reasonable assurance. So there are lots of messages involved with that. We want transparency, we want global transparency, we want assurance as well in order to stamp the quality, despite the fact, and that's something that we find is very important to give as a message, that good standards are marvelous, but they are not enough to prevent fraud. When a company wants to be fraudulent, it will find a way. So we cannot state that good standards are soundproof against fraud. But having a single set of standards will help us to educate society Because if we have thousands of frameworks, it will be impossible for us to have people aware of weaknesses and to identify a fraud when it happens. So good standards help us to get there, to have better transparency, to be better prepared to deal and to make fraud an exception and not the daily circumstance. And so that's why I think that have a global standard setter is fundamental. CBPS is the body in Brazil that takes care of the due process, but we need regulators to endorse the standards that are provided from ISSB, for example, into the Brazilian market. The Securities Commission has already done that. We hope Central Bank to follow closely, and other regulators as well, because we want the whole country using the same standard in order to provide information on sustainability.
I think there were two more questions here. Please.
Thank you. Two questions very quickly. So the first one is on the data gap that was also mentioned. So this is something that comes up many countries, including Mongolia, as we are trying to disclose. There's not a lot of data, but just wanted to understand how countries that had like TCFD, disclosure already in place for a while, how did you address this gap, and what are the key stakeholders that should be leading, right? This data development process and how we could learn from that experience. And the second question is to Elizabeth, more about the planning, about the next standards. I think we've heard about S3, S4, right, potentially, and then even going forward. So just to have everyone to have information about what we should be also expecting, right, in the coming years.
Yeah, I can try with the data gap. So to set data gap is already there, when you collect the data. One of the biggest thing, was how banks collect data on companies, for example, which data which could be coming potentially from public sector entities. And one of the latest initiative we have is we ask the corresponding public sector entities who issues, for example, licenses on certain activities, or who issue fines on certain violations of under those licenses, and so on. We ask them to do an kind of an online access for banks to those information, because that way you close the data gap, and also you make easy the process that the company is not taking the document, but the bank is doing it itself, and easily and cheaply, and also potentially reduce the risk. The company may change something there. So that could be one of the solutions. So public sector entities are big providers of the data. Normally it's done indirectly. The companies collect all this information, bring to bank, and which is costly and which has its own risks. And we try to, for example, ease this process. That was one of the initiatives which we found it to be very useful. And public sector entities are normally those you can closely work with the central bank for them, and they understand why we ask them ourselves. That cool.
I'll answer that, and also the second question. Just on data availability, I hear this all around the world, from small companies, big companies, all throughout the value chain. Everybody's concerned about data. The standards themselves recognize that not all data will be available for all entities at the time of reporting. I mean, explicitly recognizes that, and also recognizes that in many cases, particularly as the data sets are being built, estimates will be used. And so I think one of the things that for me as a practitioner is really important about the standards, that I think is underappreciated by everyone who's not an accountant, is that the standards bring what I call the discipline of accounting to a very undisciplined disclosure landscape. So how do you deal with estimates? How do you deal with corrections? How do you deal with all of these aspects that from a financial accounting perspective, have been tweaked for decades now, now bringing that to sustainability disclosures, recognizing that this will improve over time, and it's going to take time, right? I think we all need to understand that there's going to be ambiguity and learning in the first couple years at least, if not more than that. Your second question about the standards, I want to just be super clear that the board's priority right now is implementation of the global baseline and supporting that in the ways that I mentioned. And then we decided as part of our 2-year work plan on 2 smaller but equal priorities. One is enhancing our industry-specific standards, which are, refer to our SASB standards. Industry-specific disclosures are a really important part of the ISSB standards for at least 2 reasons. One, because we know from investors that they yield decision-useful information based on the business activities of a particular company or portfolio that they're looking at. And 2, because we understand that they are proportional. They are relevant to companies. You are not checking, a 30-page checklist. You are really focusing on what's important to your business. And we understand that we have some work to do to make sure that these standards the industry-based standards are useful around the world. So that's a priority. And then the second, smaller but equal focus is our research projects, which we've recently launched, one on human capital and the other on biodiversity and ecosystem services. And what I'll say about those 2 is they are research projects, not standard setting projects. So the process that we're going through right now is research on understanding what are the financial implications, how much do investors care about, if they care about it, what parts of it do they care about, and then we'll continue to go on from there, including on building on existing frameworks, such as, to the extent it's relevant, the TNFD Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, TNFD, and other frameworks as well. So more to come on that, but certainly nothing imminent from a standard setting perspective.
Thank you. I think there was one more question from that part of the room. Okay, if not, so we have 5 minutes left, and I would like our speakers to make just a very short closing statements, and I will start once again with David, because actually there was one question that I wanted to pose to you, which is that Georgia is one of the countries which geographically falls under the sort of influence of both EU standards and the global standards. So, and as the issue of interoperability has been highlighted, everybody is very focused on this, but do you feel sort of any impact of this location, this geographic location?
Sure. Thanks for this question. So we have aspiration to join the EU. We have association agreement and now talks with membership. Of course, it will take some time politically, but we are in the process of last 10 years implementing European directives, and we will certainly at some point need to implement all the directives to become a member. So the disclosure requirements will come to Georgia, but it's set to be implemented by 2027. But the thing is that we have our internal rules, but when we develop a new regulation, we always keep in mind, what's the ultimate end that we will join EU. So it's in line. We may say it's principally in line. For example, in terms of disclosure, with double materiality principle is already implemented in our. So the thing is that we try to initially simplify the things, because in Europe, I wouldn't say they like to complicate, but it's a market that's complicated much more. So the regulations need to address things. But in Georgia, we have a relatively simple market, simple sectors, a small open economy. So sometimes we try to implement the simple solutions to the problem, things to work. So we start with that one, but we always keep in mind that we need to join EU and implement all those. So principally, we are already in line, but over time we will implement. The thing is that most of our banks are either listed in Europe or have a parent shareholder in Europe, so they are already aware and they also have a pipeline to comply with it.
Thank you. Vanya, what would you leave us with from Brazil's perspective on this journey?
I would leave us with the notion that banks have a very important role in this process, because as capital providers, you can stimulate your clients and the markets all over the world to use best practice and to seek for solution for sustainability. And at the same time, you benefit from that, because in order to do your own credit assessment in order to evaluate risk before giving a financial support, you need transparent information. So having good sustainability reporting integrated with financial ones put you in a very good place in order to help to solve the world and to have better business in your companies as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, any last words from the ISSB perspective?
Nothing that I haven't already said, which is, this is a really important time for the global baseline. We're going to have a number of things happening in the coming year, not to mention the US election, for example, which will have an effect on a number of reporting entities due to what the potential implications on the SEC. We have elections also around the world, and this is a really important time for everybody to get started, and I look forward to the partnership with you all and also with the SBFN. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ghana is going to send us off.
So for us, I think the takeaway here is that we are not starting from scratch. There's already a body of knowledge and documentation that we can learn from, and that the delta between what already exists in terms of reporting and where we aspire to be in terms of adding climate reporting is not that big, because the perception is that there's a huge gap between where we are right now and where we need to get to. So I'm comforted when I hear that that delta is not that big, because already what we need to do that we're already reporting a lot of it, but what is going to change is how some of these questions are asked, and just a new way of reporting. For me, that gives us comfort. So I think we're excited about the journey. We hope that next time round would have moved from developing to advance during the next reporting cycle, and then hopefully next time round I can speak to the progress that we've made. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and this concludes our session. Thank you.
Thank you.